What up? I'm Ben Freeman from freeman-pedia.com, and we here at the Dozen Dates are all about value. That's right, all of the dates we've talked about so far have been focused on one place or one event. But today, you're getting 2 for 1. 1603 marks the beginning of 2 of the major entities to know for AP World History Month. And it's kind of weird because they start on opposite sides of the planet, but their trajectories cause them to be linked together in the coming centuries. So let's focus today on the Dutch East India Trading Company and the Tokugawa Shogunate. Oh boy, you get 2 different historical things going down in 1603. The rare double episode here on the Dozen Dates. This calls for 2 historical contexts, so let's start with the Dutch because technically they started in 1602. 111 years ago, I made a pretty big deal of the Europeans setting up these maritime empires. And it was a big deal. The British, French, Spanish, and Portuguese sent out all their explorers and conquistadors and buccaneers to seek out new lands and new civilizations, to boldly go where no European had gone before. The rest you know. You learned that stuff in 4th grade when you were tracing your hand to make a turkey on a paper plate. Nice. But this is AP World, fam. There's a whole nother tier to the Age of Discovery, and that was the Joint Stock Company. First, this is the Netherlands, right? They are up there in a weird little corner of Europe between Germany and Belgium. But don't judge a book by its cover here. The company they establish will be the most successful business in the history of the planet. Second, these guys aren't new to the trade game. Centuries before this, the Netherlands were at the heart of the Hanseatic League, a major trade league in Northern Europe. You might recognize their name today, the Hanseatic League, from the German airline Lufthansa. So how does this small trading republic compete with the big boys of Spain and Portugal? Well, if you can't beat them, fight an 80 years war with them, then have a spy named Jan Huygen van Linschoten hijack the Portuguese secret trade routes and tactics. Finally, use that knowledge to steal a Portuguese carrack and the priceless Ming porcelain inside to finance the whole Dutch East India Trading Company. Sometimes the trading companies are often associated with being a supply and demand operation that work for shareholder profits, but there's quite a bit of swashbuckling going on there too. So the Dutch, copying what the British had done 3 years earlier in 1600, created a joint stock company called the VOC, Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie. The VOC was a cartel of the top traders in the Netherlands. Think of the US president deciding to compete in the international food market. It would be best to put McDonald's and Subway and Chipotle and Taco Bell into one massive food conglomerate. But instead of Doritos Locos Tacos, the VOC had a monopoly on all Dutch trade in Asia. Not to mention this was the world's first publicly traded company. You could buy shares of this company. So before there was GameStop, there was the VOC. Also their logo, this is the first logo in history. Okay, so you're up to speed on the Dutch, but what's the context of what's going on in Japan in 1603? The last time we were over here in East Asia, we were talking about the Mongols and their Yuan dynasty, which had recently fallen to the Ming. But Japan doesn't really get any love in AP World History until 1603. This is Japan. It's an archipelago of islands off the coast of Asia. And like I said in a previous video, the study of East Asia is often focused on China, but not today. Today we look to Japan, and Japan had already been ruled by a few different shogunates at this point. You don't have to know them for AP World, so I won't mention them here. A shogunate is a system of government in which the military leader rules over Japan. Now, they still have an emperor. They've always had an emperor going all the way back to the sun goddess Amaterasu. But in the shogunate, or Bakufu system, he is only the ruler and is not actually making the decision. Think of the Japanese emperor under the rule of the shogunate as kind of like the Pope. He's in power, but he doesn't actually control much. You don't have to know the previous shogunates, but you definitely need to know this one, the Tokugawa Shogunate. Japan was in a pretty feudal state at this point. Think of the lords and serfs of Europe, but in Japan. Feudal lords in Japan were called daimyo. These daimyo each ruled a section of Japan, but under a series of unifiers that culminated with Tokugawa Ieyasu, these daimyo all fell under the rule of the shogun. This was the Tokugawa Shogunate. Okay, the Dutch have entered the trade game with the Dutch East India Trading Company, and Japan has unified under a shogunate. So why does the year 1603 matter? 1603 is a watershed moment for both Japan and maritime trade. For Japan, you have their final and most powerful shogunate, the Tokugawa Shogunate. This is the only one you need to know, and that all began in 1603. Japan will enter into its longest era of peace and stability under the rule of the Tokugawa. And as we will see, Japan will definitely have its clashes with other cultures and militaries, but for now, let's leave Japan as on a path to growth and stability for the next few centuries under the leadership of the Tokugawa. For the Dutch, 1603 is their coming out party. Their arrival in the Indian Ocean changes the game. But unlike Japan, this will be the only thing you need to know about the Dutch. So when you see 1603 over here and you think, oh yeah, the Dutch Trading Company, the VOC, it's not like any other place we've talked about that might come up over and over. Think of the Dutch Trading Company like the Mongols. They were super important and groundbreaking, but only in the specific time period they exist in. So for the Mongols, that was the post-classical era, and for the Dutch, that's the early modern era. All right, you got some background, and you know why 1603 is a momentous year for Japan and the Dutch. But what actually happened in 1603? So the Dutch have their joint stock company. They have the knowledge, the means, and the financial backing to start empire building. And in 1603, that's exactly what they do. In February, they hijacked that Portuguese carrack I mentioned earlier, the Santa Catarina. They saw it docked in Singapore and were like, what if we just took it? And they did. After a few hours of fighting, they took possession of all the silks and spices and porcelain aboard. Now, there were some repercussions for stealing the equivalent of millions of dollars of goods from a competitor. They fought a 60-year war with the Portuguese, not to be confused with the 80 Years' War that they were simultaneously fighting with the Spanish. Using public investment and stolen Portuguese booty, the Dutch East India Company set up their first permanent settlement in Banten, West Java in modern-day Indonesia. From here, they would dominate the spice trade, which would lead to record profits for the VOC and centuries of Dutch rule in the region. So after 1603, the Dutch are now major players in the Indian Ocean trade. But what was happening just 3,000 miles north of the new Dutch settlement in Japan? So, as we mentioned before, Japan was dominated by a bunch of daimyos or feudal lords. They each controlled a section of Japan, so power was pretty decentralized. But what if one of those daimyos took power and ruled over all the other daimyos? That's exactly what Tokugawa Ieyasu did in Japan. In March of 1603, at the age of 60, Tokugawa Ieyasu was granted the title of shogun by the emperor. The Dutch are established, and there's a new shogun in town in Japan. That's why 1603 is on the list. I don't want to give too much away here, but the Dutch just hit the lottery. The VOC is established in the dead center of the valuable Indian Ocean trade and will go on to be one of the biggest players in the Indian Ocean over the next 200 years. Using their ships known as flauts, they will be shipping roughly half of all goods to Europe. But due to corruption, competition, and mismanagement, the VOC will eventually become unprofitable, and their monopoly was allowed to expire in 1799. The Dutch government would take over control of much of what was left in the VOC's possession. Japan is entering into the Edo period. This is a legendary period for Japanese culture and history. They will remain at peace for the next few centuries. You get all kinds of art like this, and this, and this. They do run into a bit of a problem that a lot of Earth was dealing with at this time. The Europeans are coming. The shogun has a simple plan. Pack up all your European stuff and get out of Japan. Catholicism was catching on in Tokugawa, Japan, after a period of unrestricted trade. But Tokugawa was all about stability and peace, and a new religion being introduced was disruptive to this goal. So in 1633, the shogun shut it down. The new policy, now known as Sakoku, or locked country, that meant all foreign nationals had to go and were not allowed to return, and trade was limited to only a few ports and only a few partners. The trade with their traditional trading partners of China and Korea was allowed to continue. Wait, remember like 2 hours ago at the beginning of this video when I was like, but their trajectories caused them to be linked together in the coming centuries. Remember that? Well, there was one European group that was allowed limited trade at one port off the coast of modern-day Nagasaki on a man-made island named Dejima. Guess which one? The Dutch VOC. The majority of Christian converts in Japan were Catholic, and the shogun saw the Dutch, who were Protestant Christians, as a different religion. So the Dutch were allowed to stay as long as they promised not to engage in any missionary activity. What? You missed a special 2-for-1 edition of the Dozen Dates for AP World and need a TLDW to catch up? Oh, much like the shogun to the Dutch trying to trade in Japan. I'll allow it. 1603 was so important that it had 2 major AP World events. The Dutch entered the maritime trade game by creating the VOC, the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, the most successful trading company of all time. They went on to dominate the spice trade in the Indian Ocean. Meanwhile, in Japan, a shogun by the name of Tokugawa Ieyasu has unified all of Japan under his leadership. This new period of peace and cultural achievements will last well into the 1800s. These 2 new entities that came to prominence in 1603 eventually overlapped when the Tokugawa shogun banned all foreign trade to all Europeans except for the merchants of the Dutch VOC. Alright, 1603 is behind us. We've seen dates from Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, and Unit 4. But I think it's time for a change. All these kings and queens barking orders at everyone like they were chosen by God. We'll see about that. But you'll have to wait 173 years, all the way to the year 1776.